In this lesson, we are going to learn how to change a fraction into a decimal. For the lesson, we're going to use the fraction 12 over 22. Now, we know that the denominator of a fraction is actually representing the divisor in a division problem, because every fraction actually is a division problem. So let's represent this fraction as a division problem. Our divisor is 22. Divisor always goes on the outside. And we are dividing, or our dividend is 12. Now right away you notice that 12 is smaller than 22. So that means our answer is going to be a decimal. If we were asked to find the decimal answer that we're converting to and round it to the nearest hundredth, we would need actually a decimal and 3 zeros. Because when we round to our hundredths place, which is right here, we need to look at our thousandths place to decide whether we'll round that hundredth up or down. So anytime that we are dividing a decimal, we know that we pretend that decimal is not there in our dividend until the end of our problem. When we have our answer, then we'll add it back in. So let's get started. If we pretend that decimal place isn't there, then our dividend wouldn't be 12.000, it would actually be 12,000. But this is a really large number at first. So I like to use this strategy to help us break down this problem into easier problems. So let's look at 22. Can 22 go into 1? No, it can't. Can 22 go into 12? No, 12 is still smaller than 22. Can 22 go into 120? Yes. So now we need to find a factor to multiply by 22 to get it as close as we can to 120 without going over. So let's think about what we know. We know that 25 times 4 is 100. So let's see if 22 times 5 will get us close to 120 without going over. So I can't do 22 times 5 mentally, so I'm going to write out my work here. 22 times 5. Our first problem will be 5 times 20, and our second problem will be 5 times 2. Let's start with 5 times 20. Well, our simple problem, 5 times 2 is 10, and we add our 0. Now let's look at our second problem. 5 times 2 is 10. Let's add up to see what our final product is. So 22 times 5 is 110. I'm going to write that right below the numbers I underlined. Now we still have these 2 zeros on the end. So we know 22 times 5 is 110. We want to add these 2 zeros into our factor. So 22 times 5 is 110, and we add our 2 zeros into our answer. Remember, it's all about looking at the simpler problems and then adding the zeros in as placeholders. I'm going to erase this scratch work I did here to save, so we have room to finish our division. Okay, now we want to subtract to see what our next dividend will be, and to make our dividend smaller. So let's look to see if we need to trade first anywhere. Looks like all of our numbers on the top are larger than numbers on the bottom. 0 minus 0 is 0 all the way across here. 2 minus 1 is 1. And 1 minus 1 is 0. Now we're dividing 1,000 by 22. Let's do the same strategy again to break our dividend 1,000 down into easier parts so we can find what we need to multiply 22 by to get close to it. Well, let's look. Can 22 go into 1? No. Can 22 be multiplied by anything to get to 10? Or can 22 go into 10? No. Can 22 go into 100? Yes. Let's stop there. What times 22 will get us close to 100 but not over? Well, we know 25 times 4, like we said, is 100. So we know that 22 times 4 won't be over 100, but it'll give us a close product. Let's do our multiplication again. First problem will be 4 times 20. Second problem will be 4 times 2. Simple problem in 4 times 20 is 4 times 2. That's 8. Add your 0. 4 times 2 is 8. So our answer is 88. So we know we can use 22 times 4, and that gives us 88. Now we still have this extra 0 from our dividend, so let's add that onto our 4 to make it a 40. And we know 22 times 4 is our simple problem is 88. Add your 0. 22 times 40 would be 180. Now again, I'm going to take our scratch work out of the way, only so we have room to finish our division here. Let's find out, after we subtract, what our new dividend will be. And here we need to do some trade first. 0 is bigger than 0. 0 here is smaller than 8, so we need to change this to a 10, which would change this to a 0. Now we look at our next 0 is smaller than our 8, so we need to change this now to a 9, and that would change this to a 10. I know these numbers are really small and bunched together, so bear with me here. Let's start our subtraction. 0 minus 0 is 0. 10 minus 8 would be 2. And 9 minus 8 would be 1. Now we have 120 as our new dividend. Well, let's see what we can multiply by 22 to get close to 120. And if you remember from our math before, we know that 22 times 5 will give us 110. So let's use that. Put our factor over here, times 5, and that gives us 110. We have a remainder of 10. 22 cannot be multiplied by anything to 10 to get to 10, because 10 is smaller. So we know it's our remainder, and we know we're finished. Let's add up our factors on the right here to find out what our answer is. Add our ones column, 5. Add our tens column, 4. And add your hundreds column, 5. So I'm going to transfer my answer, 545, right back up to the top. Now we're not done. We forgot about our decimal place the whole time, but we need to remember to add it back in at the end. So in any number, whether we see a decimal or not, we assume that it is to the right of our ones place. Since our decimal is 3 places to the right, 3 places to the left, in our problem, we know we're going to move it 3 places to the left for our answer. Now we have 545 thousandths. I'm going to write that here. 545 thousandths. Now, if you remember from the beginning of the video, we talked about how we are rounding to the hundredths place, or the nearest hundredths. So I'm going to underline the hundredths place that we're rounding to. Now we know anytime that we're rounding, we need to look to our number to the right. If it's 5 or more, we raise the score. If it's 4 or less, we let it rest. In this case, that number to the right is a 5. So that means we will raise our hundredths place up 1, 2, 5. And our answer would be 55 hundredths. over 22, when converted to a decimal and rounded to the nearest hundredths place, is 55 hundredths. If you know your division with decimals, it's all about taking your steps very slowly, adding your decimal back in, and rounding the correct place. Make sure you always remember that the denominator of a fraction is the divisor in your addition problem.